Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Yukong Zhao. Thank you all. Thank you for the kind words. Thank you for the invitation. But thank you beyond that. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for what you're doing. And not just for standing up, but for doing it forcefully, doing it courageously, doing it with data and facts and specifics. We have a lot of people coming to our agency from many different groups, and I have been pleased to hear from the leadership of AACE, and pleased at the very forceful advocacy that you have provided. Advocacy, I would say, for justice, and I think that's very important. I'm pleased to see some old friends here, pleased to see some new friends here. I have to say that the issues that you're discussing are profoundly important. This is, I would say, an historical conference. You are raising issues that are not necessarily popular in every circle, but they're issues that need to be raised, and you're raising them well. So I thank you. I thank you because I think that you are speaking up for equality and diversity for all Americans and all American students. But I thank you also because I believe that discrimination against Asian American students is a very big problem in American education today, and it's about time that we do something about it. And I think it's important for all Americans that we do something about discrimination against Asian American students, because it's not just about Asian Americans, it's about our values, it's about living up to our principles. And it's about time to admit that there are times where the system is rigged, there are times where people are buying their way in, there are times where people are scamming their way in, and there are too many doors that are closed to groups, including Asian American students, based on stereotypes, based on misperceptions, based on ignorance, and in some cases based on pure bigotry. And I think that we need to speak forcefully and clearly against it. There are, as one of the prior speakers mentioned, many important issues in American higher education, and we need to speak to all of them. But that is not a reason to turn away from injustice. That is not a reason to ignore when we see institutions that are using invidious stereotypes about any group based on this notion that they lack personalities that are as positive as other groups. A few years ago, I established, as it was kindly pointed out, established a human rights organization called the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. And we were concerned about advancement of justice for all groups, but in particular fighting anti-Semitism in higher education. And people came to me and they asked, are you open to speaking out against Asian American discrimination in higher education? And so I looked into it, and my board of directors looked into it, because that wasn't our specific focus. We were looking at anti-Semitism in higher education. But the concern that we had, and the reason that we ended up speaking out, is that we realized that many of the same problems facing Asian Americans in higher education are the same ones that we had seen for the Jewish community many years before. That the time had come in the 20th century where we saw institutions of higher education, especially highly selective institutions, were either developing quotas against Jewish students or substitutes for quotas, proxies for quotas, ways of getting around quotas. And they wouldn't say, we don't want so many Jews here, but they would say, well, we're looking at other things. They would say, we're looking at character, which is a code word for we don't think that your character is as good as other groups. They would say we want well-rounded, which is a way of saying we don't think you're as well-rounded as other groups. And what we increasingly found is that in too many instances, in the 21st century, Asian American students are facing exactly the same kinds of barriers that had been erected against Jewish students in the 20th century, and that has to stop. We cannot permit any group to face the same problems that we've seen in the past. We have to move forward, not backwards. And we cannot accept the notion that there are some students who bring value based on their group membership that other students do not. That too has to stop. So those views I brought on behalf of the Louis D. Brandeis Center several years ago, as opposed to the U.S. Department of Education, but they're still my view today. I still believe today that we need to do more to look into discrimination wherever it appears, including in particular the stereotypes and biases that we see against Asian American students in higher education. Thank you kindly for mentioning, among other things, that a couple of months after I started as Assistant Secretary of Education, the very first public-facing action that I took was to eliminate 7 guidances issued by the prior administration on racial preferences in higher education and K-12. And we did it because those guidances went beyond what's required by law. We did it because they went beyond what the Supreme Court did. We did it because we do not believe in substituting opinion for law. This is a country of law. In Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which we enforce at the Office for Civil Rights, prohibits discrimination on the basis of race or ethnic origin, and that includes anti-Asian discrimination. And we must fight anti-Asian discrimination as forcefully as we do any other form of bigotry. Now, when we eliminated those 7 guidances, we didn't eliminate or change in any way the statute on which they were supposed to be based or the Supreme Court opinions that interpret them. And we do know that some of the Supreme Court cases that have been mentioned today do, in fact, permit the use of some racial preferences in some circumstances, but there are limits and there are rules. And those limits and rules are established by law and interpreted by the Supreme Court. And what we do is we follow them. We follow the statutes as passed by Congress in full, no more, no less. That's our job, and that's what we do. But that's all we need to do in order to make sure that there is justice in cases in which students are facing discrimination. Recently, we issued a letter in a case that doesn't directly address Asian American students, but I think is certainly pertinent to this issue. It involved Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. In that case, we were examining allegations that the institution was using racial preferences in a manner that appeared not to be justified by law, and without providing evidence to indicate the extent of burden on other students, and without providing sufficient evidence to indicate whether there was monitoring to determine whether race-neutral alternatives could do the same work. And we were pleased to enter into a resolution agreement in which the university agreed not to do that any longer. We need to... And I think that there's been some reference to the fact that while we cannot address or speak to open investigations, we can acknowledge the fact that we have opened investigations into allegations of anti-Asian discrimination in programs at Yale University and at Montgomery County, Maryland. And while I cannot speak to the details of those cases, what I can assure you is this. In those cases, as in all of our cases, we will investigate the facts and the evidence where they go, and we will make sure that the law is enforced. I believe that that's all at the end that we need to do. I think in too many cases, educators have come to the misunderstanding that they do not need to follow the same rules when it comes to Asian American students. And that can't be the case. I am not talking about special favors or special rules for Asian American students, and I don't believe that you're talking about special favors or special rules for Asian American students. What I'm talking about, and what I believe you're talking about, is having everybody apply this by the same rules. We need the same rules applied to the same students all the time. I mentioned courage a little while ago, and I just want to say another word about that, because I know within the Jewish community, when we spoke out against anti-Semitism, there were some who applauded and some who didn't. And there were some who were concerned that if we spoke out too loudly and too forcefully, there could be a backlash, people could be offended, it could lead to people saying, well, wait a minute, you're being too noisy, too arrogant, too this, to that. Every time we try to speak out, there are some people who would say thank you for speaking out, and others who are saying, please don't, please don't. So I know that when you come forward, it's not easy. I know that when you come forward, there are going to be people who are going to be saying thank you, but there are going to be people who are not saying thank you. There are going to be people even who recognize the injustices that you're facing and still saying thank you, no thank you. Right? And I believe that it is critical for every group to speak out against injustices when they find them. I am grateful at the kind words that you provided. I am grateful that you think that we are doing positive work in some areas. But don't let me rest on that. And please don't rest on it yourself. Because there is so much work that has to be done. And because there are difficult decisions that need to be made every day. And because it is absolutely critical that your voices be heard. Believe me, there are voices on the other side. And there are people always on the side of injustice who are going to be heard. We need to hear you too. I am so thrilled that we are hearing you today. I am pleased that we have an open dialogue and that at the Office for Civil Rights we will hear you after today. And I am hopeful that after this important conference, you will take this not just as a culmination, although this is, I'm sure, a culmination of a great deal of effort, and you should be proud, and I hope you are proud, but as the beginning of something moving forward, because there's so much work that has to be done. We all need to be courageous continuously. We all need to continue to fight this fight. I was interested this morning to hear the eloquent comments about how some of the problems that we've heard today affect the economy, and they do. And also to hear how they affect national security, and they do. They also affect justice and injustice, and that I think is the number one, to deal with them and to deal with them first, even though there are other issues that need to be addressed also. At the end of the day, though, it's a matter simply of making good on our commitments. Certainly from the point of view of the Office for Civil Rights, it's not just a matter of policies that favor the economy or policies that favor the national security. It's a matter of enforcing the laws that are already in the book. It's a matter of standing to the values and honoring the values that we say that we stand for. If we just do that, if we just continue to honor the values that we espouse, and if we enforce the statutes that are already on the books, I think that we can make steady progress. But I tell you, it will take considerable efforts, hopefully by a much larger group of people than we have in the room, although I am seeing great leaders in the room today. And I'll tell you, as we work to enforce the law, and as we work to strengthen the economy and national security, and as we strive to promote justice in the United States, I am deeply honored and privileged to be able to work with you in doing that. So thank you for your invitation, thank you for your kind reception, and thank you for what you're doing.